He stood alone on a rainy sidewalk, a billionaire CEO dressed in power, drowning in silence. No cameras, no security. No one around him knew that the man who owned half the skyline was quietly falling apart inside. And just as he was about to step back into his black Maybach and disappear into the darkness of another empty night, a tiny voice shattered everything. "You look sad, mister. Wanna meet my mommy?" He froze. She was 6 years old, wearing a yellow raincoat, boots that didn't match, and eyes that somehow saw straight through him. What happened next didn't make headlines, but it changed his entire life. Because this wasn't just a story about a millionaire. It was about how a stranger's kindness, a cup of cocoa, and a child's drawing brought a broken man back to life, and what he did after will leave you in tears. Don't blink, because one moment, one voice, and one door changed everything. He built empires out of concrete and glass, from abandoned parking lots to skyscrapers that pierced the heavens. His name was etched into the skyline of the city like a crown. Cole Wessinger, they called him the Wolf of Real Estate, a self-made billionaire, a man who could close 9-figure deals before breakfast, but not a soul in the world knew how lonely power could be, until Cole did. He once stood at the top of the world. Now he stood on the edge of a sidewalk, invisible. It was one of those cold New York evenings when the wind bites through even the thickest coat, and the streetlights flicker like they're trying to hold on just like he was. His driver waited in the black Maybach just behind him, but Cole didn't get in. He couldn't. Something in his chest ached too deeply tonight. He looked down at his reflection in a puddle beneath his feet. The face staring back wasn't the man on magazine covers. It was hollow, unrecognizable, sad. His phone buzzed again. He didn't bother to check. He knew it was probably another reminder, another dinner he'd RSVP'd to and wouldn't attend. He hadn't been home in days, not because of meetings, but because home didn't feel like home anymore. His wife had walked out a year ago, said she was tired of sleeping beside someone who didn't even look at her. His son had stopped calling, and Cole, he stopped feeling until tonight, because tonight someone did something no one had done in years. They saw him. A small voice broke the stillness. "Hey, mister, you look sad." He looked up slowly, and there she was, a little girl, no older than 6, wearing a bright yellow raincoat, 2 sizes too big, and rain boots that didn't match. Her cheeks were rosy from the cold, her eyes bright and full of something he hadn't felt in forever. Pure human warmth. For a second, he didn't know what to say. People didn't talk to him unless they needed something, but this little girl didn't need anything. She was offering something. "You look sad," she said again, tilting her head. "Wanna meet my mommy?" He blinked, caught off guard. "Your mommy?" he asked slowly, like the words didn't make sense. "Yeah," she said, smiling. "She says cocoa makes sad people better. She makes the best cocoa in the whole world." He glanced toward the alley she pointed to. A narrow lane tucked between 2 rundown buildings. Warm light spilled from a single window. "I shouldn't," he murmured, mostly to himself, but the girl had already started walking. She turned back, held out her tiny hand, and said, "Come on, mister. You don't gotta be sad alone." And in that moment, something cracked inside him, not from logic, not from reason, but from the raw ache of wanting to feel something again. So he followed. The billionaire in $1,000 suit followed the little girl in rubber boots through the rain. Each step away from the curb felt like he was stepping away from the man he used to be, and towards something he didn't understand yet. The alley was quiet, humble, nothing like the glass towers he ruled from. But as they reached the door, he smelled something warm and familiar. Cinnamon, chocolate home. The girl pushed the door open. "Mommy, I brought someone." Inside, the apartment was small and lived in, the kind of place that had more love than space. A woman turned from the stove, startled. Her eyes darted to Cole. She hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to be alarmed or amused. He raised his hands gently. "I'm sorry, your daughter found me." The woman looked at him closely, not at the suit, not at the watch, but at his eyes, and she saw it. The sadness, just like her daughter did. "You're just in time," she said softly. "Cocoa's ready." She poured 3 cups and motioned him to sit. Cole hesitated. This table was worn down by life, not mahogany polished by power. But somehow he wanted to be there more than any boardroom he'd ever stepped in. The little girl slid a mug toward him. "I told you it helps," she whispered. He smiled, not politely, genuinely. The warmth of the cocoa, the sound of the woman humming softly as she stirred, the smell of cinnamon. It wrapped around him like a blanket he didn't know he needed. For the first time in years, he didn't feel judged. He wasn't Mr. Wessinger. He wasn't a CEO. He wasn't a billionaire. He was just Cole, and Cole was tired. He sat there and listened to stories from a child who believed in magic and a mother who believed in kindness. He told them about nights filled with empty hotel suites and planes that always took him farther from the people he loved. And they listened, not because he was important, but because he was human. By the end of the night, he didn't want to leave. Because for the first time in a long time, he felt seen, and that changed everything. Not the cocoa, not the conversation, but the fact that he'd been invited, not into a house, but into someone's heart. And deep down, he knew this was no accident. He didn't find them, they found him. The moment lingered like a memory too precious to let go. Cole didn't remember the last time he sat at a table where no one asked about stock prices, portfolios, or quarterly projections. No one cared about his wealth, his title, or the luxury watch on his wrist. They cared that he looked human, he looked broken, and for once that was enough. He wrapped both hands around the chipped ceramic mug as if it was holding him together. Steam rose cinnamon, laced and soft, reminding him of something long forgotten. "I'm sorry," he finally said, voice low, almost hoarse. The woman, Grace, looked up from the stove. "For what?" she asked gently, tilting her head. "For crashing into your night like this. For showing up like a ghost that forgot how to be alive." She smiled, the kind of smile that didn't ask for details. Sometimes ghosts just need a place to remember who they were. He closed his eyes for a second. Her words didn't feel like sympathy. They felt like truth. The kind of truth that didn't hurt, it healed. He looked down at the little girl beside him, Leela, still swinging her legs beneath the table and sipping her cocoa like nothing was unusual. She was humming a tune carefree, as if the world couldn't touch her light. He envied that. How does she do that? He asked softly, just, "Live like that." Grace glanced at her daughter with a softness that only mothers carry. "She sees people. It's her gift." Cole chuckled weakly. "She saw right through me." Grace nodded. "She always does, especially the ones trying hardest not to be seen." He stared at the cocoa in front of him. It wasn't about the drink. It was about the warmth behind the offer. A little girl with no idea who he was, and yet, somehow, she gave him more humanity than anyone had in years. "What do you do?" Grace asked, not out of curiosity, but conversation. "I run a few companies," he replied. She smiled. "That sounds important." "It used to feel like it," he admitted. "Doesn't anymore." He paused. "I don't know what matters anymore." There was no judgment in her face. "No pity, only presence. Sometimes," she said, "we build castles so tall we forget what the ground feels like." He looked at her. That hit deeper than she probably knew. He had built skyscrapers, owned islands, driven cars that most people only saw in magazines, but he couldn't remember the last time someone spoke to his soul like this. It felt like something inside him was slowly being put back together, not by grandeur, but by grace. Dinner was simple. Mac and cheese, frozen peas, and somehow it was the best meal he'd had in years. They ate, laughed. He told them about the time he almost bought a vineyard in France just because he liked the name. Leela giggled like it was the funniest story in the world. Grace told him about the time she locked herself out of her apartment in pajamas and had to climb in through the fire escape, 6 months pregnant. And they all laughed again. It wasn't about the stories, it was about the safety. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was sacred. After dinner, Grace packed up a small container of leftovers and handed it to him. "Just in case," she said with a smile. It felt like a hug in plastic. And then Leela ran to her little art desk and returned with a folded sheet of paper, a crayon drawing, stick figures holding hands. A sun with a smiling face, 3 mugs of cocoa, and at the top in big red letters, Happy Mister. He stared at it, longer than he'd ever stared at a blueprint. Something inside him cracked, and this time, it didn't hurt. It released something. He folded the paper carefully and placed it inside his coat pocket like it was the most valuable document he'd ever carried, because it was. It wasn't just a drawing, it was a mirror. He stood at the door, unsure of how to leave, unsure of how to return to the cold world outside. Grace saw that. "We're always here," she said quietly, "if you ever need cocoa or company." Her words didn't beg for a return. They offered one. He nodded, throat tight. Leela waved, "Come back soon, Mr. Happy." He smiled for real this time and stepped into the night, but the city felt different now, not smaller, but less heavy, less sharp, less cold. As he walked back to the Maybach, he didn't feel like the same man who'd stepped out of it earlier. He opened the door but didn't sit inside just yet. He stood there looking up at the sky, letting the rain hit his face, not hiding from it, not running from it, letting it wash him clean. His phone buzzed again. An emergency board meeting. His assistant's frantic voice through the speaker. "Sir, the Tokyo project needs your approval before midnight." Cole looked into the night and whispered something no one expected. Let it wait. He finally sat down, not with weight, but with peace. And as the driver pulled away, Cole pressed his hand to his chest pocket, where the drawing rested. Happy Mister. He had been called a king, a tycoon, a genius, but nothing ever felt as real as that. Tonight, he wasn't any of those things. He was just a man who followed a little girl down an alley and found a door that didn't just open into a home. It opened into hope, and in a world full of empty noise that mattered more than all the applause in the world. The streets were alive with motion, but Cole Wessinger walked as if the world had slowed down around him. He had spent his life chasing the future, chasing numbers, chasing power. But now, after one night in a tiny apartment with a chipped cup and a child's smile, he was chasing something far more important: meaning. He stood by the window of his high-rise penthouse, staring out at the city that once made him feel like a king. Tonight, it felt distant, colder, like it didn't recognize the man he was becoming. He reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out the crumpled drawing. Happy Mister, 3 stick figures, smiling, cocoa in hand. His fingers trembled as he smoothed it out. It didn't matter that he had buildings with his name on them. This piece of crayon paper felt like his most valuable possession. He couldn't sleep that night, not because of stress, but because of something new, something rare, longing. He wanted to see them again, to sit in that warmth again, to hear the little girl call him Mr. Happy again. He woke early the next morning and canceled every meeting. He turned off his phone, no assistant, no driver. He drove himself back to that same alley, hoping to feel that magic again, but when he arrived, he knew something was wrong. The window was dark, the door locked. He knocked, waited, knocked again, silence. He asked around, walked to the corner store where the owner remembered Grace and her daughter. "Sweet lady," the old man said. "They left last night, said they couldn't afford the rent anymore, took everything they had, don't know where they went." Cole stood still, like the breath had been knocked from his lungs. The alley, once glowing with warmth and cocoa, now felt like a memory fading too fast. He returned to his car and sat behind the wheel in silence. For the first time in years, he cried, not because he lost something, but because he finally realized what it meant to care about someone without expecting anything in return. That little girl, she didn't just offer cocoa, she gave him back his humanity, and now she was gone. He didn't give up. He searched. He called every shelter, checked every community center in the district. He even had his assistant help, without telling her why. But there was no sign of Grace or Leela. Days passed, then weeks, and the drawing stayed in his pocket like a compass pointing to a place he could no longer find. Until one Sunday morning, he was walking through Central Park, hands in his coat, the world spinning as usual, but something stopped him, a familiar voice, high, bright, and unforgettable. "Mr. Happy." He turned around, heart pounding. There she was, Leela, same yellow raincoat, same mismatched boots, running straight into his arms. He dropped to his knees and caught her, holding her like something fragile and eternal. Tears welled in his eyes. "I missed you," she whispered. "I missed you more," he replied, voice cracking. He looked up, and there stood Grace. She was smiling, her eyes soft, hands tucked in the same worn coat. He stood slowly, his heart swelling with something he hadn't felt in years. "Where did you go?" he asked. "Life moved us," she replied gently, "but it didn't move us away from you." He told her everything, how he searched, how he canceled meetings, how he couldn't stop thinking about that night. Grace nodded. "I didn't think we'd see you again. I couldn't let go," he whispered. "You changed something in me." Grace shook her head. "No, Cole, we didn't change you. You just remembered who you are." They walked together for a while. No destination, just steps shared in silence. Then, quietly, Cole said, "Can I help with anything?" Grace looked at him, not with awe, not with fear, but with genuine thought. "Yes," she said softly, "but only if it's from the heart, not the wallet." He smiled, that warm kind of smile that comes from finally understanding the difference. From that day forward, Cole was no longer just a man of money. He became a man of meaning. He helped Grace start a small cocoa cafe. They named it Leela's Cocoa Corner, and nothing fancy, just a place filled with laughter, mismatched mugs, and little drawings on the walls. He came by every week, sometimes with gifts, sometimes with groceries. But mostly, with time, he'd sit and sip cocoa with Leela, listen to her stories about school, and sometimes read her bedtime tales if Grace had to work late. And the man who once ruled towers now lived for Tuesdays at Leela's cafe. Years passed, the cafe grew. People came not just for cocoa, but for comfort, because somehow that little place captured something the city had lost: human connection. One crisp autumn evening, Cole stood outside the cafe with a silver-haired beard and softer eyes. Leela ran out, now a teenager, still carrying her sketchpad. "Grandpa," she called. She wasn't his by blood, but by bond. She handed him a folded paper. He opened it slowly, a drawing, 3 people, holding mugs, big smiles, a red sun, and at the top, "Mr. Happy Forever." He laughed, tears slipping freely now, because that's what life had done, taken a broken man on a sidewalk, and returned him whole through the hands of a child. People always thought billionaires had it all, but Cole Wessinger would tell you the truth. He had nothing, until the night someone offered him cocoa. He thought he was lost in success, but that little voice, those 7 words, saved him. "You look sad, mister. Wanna meet my mommy?" And from that moment on, everything changed forever. Years passed, but Cole never forgot the sound of that voice. The voice that didn't care about who he was, only how he felt. The little girl who saw a sadness no one else noticed, and answered it with cocoa, crayons, and compassion. What began as a random encounter on a rain-soaked sidewalk became the moment that redirected a lifetime. Cole stepped away from boardrooms not because he lost everything, but because he finally realized what he truly had. He found peace in quiet places. He found wealth not in profit, but in presence. And as the world moved faster and louder, he chose to slow down and listen. To sit beside the people who didn't know how to impress, but knew how to love. And it was there, in that cafe, in the echo of Leela's laughter and the smell of cinnamon, that he built a new kind of legacy. Not a legacy of concrete and towers, but a legacy of hearts changed, one cup at a time. He used to believe that impact came from power, from how high you could build, how many people knew your name, or how far your influence reached. But now, sitting by the window of Leela's Cocoa Corner, with sunlight pouring in and music humming through the speakers, he knew the truth. Real impact comes quietly. It shows up in a hug, in a child's drawing, in the decision to stay when it's easier to leave. It shows up in the spaces where no one is watching, only feeling. And Cole, he felt everything now, every laugh, every tear. every quiet moment of gratitude that reminded him. He almost missed all of this. He almost walked away that night. He almost ignored that voice, that tiny voice with the courage to care. But he didn't. He followed. And in doing so, he found something that every billionaire secretly searches for: home. Not the kind with marble floors or ocean views, but the kind made of people who choose to see you, even when the world forgets, even when you forget yourself. One afternoon, as he stood behind the counter refilling cocoa for a couple in from out of town, a little boy tugged on his sleeve. "Mister, are you the happy guy?" He looked down, heart full. Leela, now in college, had told the story hundreds of times, but it still made him smile. "Yes," he said softly. "I used to be sad, but then I met someone, and everything changed." He handed the boy his cocoa and turned back to the window, sunlight washing over the cafe. People came and went, but Cole stayed, right where it all began, not to relive the past, but to protect the spark that once saved him. He wasn't chasing anything anymore, because he'd already found everything that mattered. And if you ever passed that little cafe on the corner, you'd see the drawing still framed on the wall, faded but never forgotten. 3 figures holding hands, Coco in the middle, and at the top in red crayon, Mr. Happy Forever. And beneath it, in handwriting that was once broken but now whole, someone had written, "It only takes one voice to change a life." And sometimes that voice is small, sometimes that voice is 6 years old, but if you're lucky enough to hear it, follow it, because it might just lead you home.